What's the creepiest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? When I was 7 or 8, I would have a reoccurring nightmare that one of my dolls came to life, played with me, and then would try to pull me into my closet with her. I'd follow her into the closet at first, but then she'd show me this little door at the back of the closet, and my heart would start to race. I don't know what it was about that door, but I knew something bad would happen if I went through it. I'd start to struggle and try to pull away, but the doll was too strong and would start pulling me through the door. At this point in the dream, I'd always wake up screaming. The worst part was I had night terrors, so sometimes I'd wake up standing next to my closet. Every night before bed, I'd make my parents make sure there wasn't a little door at the back of my closet. There never was. Anyway, I was talking to my mom the other day, and this dream came up. I'm laughing about how ridiculously paranoid I was about dolls in that closet, but my mom gets really quiet. She tells me the creepy part of that dream wasn't the doll. It was the fact that there used to be a little door at the back of the closet, but when I was 1 year old, they remodeled the house and put a wall where the door was. There's no way I could have remembered that door, but years later I kept dreaming about it. None of my friends believe this story, but I swear it's true. It was over 10 years ago now when a friend and I visited Japan. It was our first time there, so we went with a tour company. However, after the tour ended, we stayed an extra night in a hotel in East Ikebukuro. During the tour leader tells us stories of haunted hotels and other urban myths, as you do over beers. One of the things he'd tell us was to be wary if you find a room where the head of the bed was positioned next to the window. So if you look up while lying in bed, you look out the window. He'd try to scare us by saying in those rooms, ghosts would come through the window at night and drag you out to your death. Back to the East Ikebukuro Hotel. We checked in the early evening, and the first thing we notice is how small the room was. The second thing is, they gave us a double bed instead of twin singles. And the third, the bed head was right next to the window. We rationalized that the room was too small to align the bed any other way, and the tour leader was full of it. To be honest, we were more annoyed that we had to share a double bed. My friend and I decided to just let it go since it was just for one night. That night, I get woken up by a door slamming shut, and I jolt up. There, sitting at the foot of the bed, is a woman in a blue kimono. She had long hair, and from what I could make out, her kimono had butterflies on it. I freak out and bury my head under my pillow. I remember thinking, is this real? How can I check without looking? In my genius, I decided to shuffle my foot down the bed thinking, if I don't touch anything, it's just my imagination. I didn't think about what I'd do if I did touch something. Little by little, my foot moves down the bed when I notice that there is definitely a depression at the foot of the bed. Someone or something was there. I retreat my foot, start to sweat, and at this point, I just start repeatedly saying the Lord's Prayer until I fall back asleep. I remember waking up at 6 the next morning, and my friend was already dressed and packed. I asked him if he saw or heard anything last night, and all he says is, I don't want to talk about it. Let's check out. I was visiting my dad, who is a nurse at a pretty busy hospital. I was sitting in one of the hallways when it suddenly became deathly silent, which was strange. Out of nowhere, a nurse pushing a cart came around the corner and started to approach my general direction. As he got closer, I saw he was pushing a body that was completely concealed beneath a white sheet. Being curious, I watched as he walked by. The nurse noticed me watching and quickened his pace. He got to the end of the hallway and opened the elevator. As he got on, I swear I heard the body beneath the sheet let out a loud gasp and start to stir. Before I could react, the elevator doors started to close, and the last thing I saw was the nurse looking at me, smiling. The weirdest part was when I asked my dad about it, he just gave me a puzzled look and said that's not possible. Bodies were never transferred out in the open, and they had a private elevator just for moving them. I still think about it to this day, wondering what I possibly witnessed. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. I used to have a buddy who lived in the same neighborhood as me, just a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 p.m., I said my goodbyes and went home. It was a short walk, about 15 minutes, so I never drove. Anyway, it was an uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going to work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute, and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning, and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did at that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone, and sure enough, it's 5-something a.m. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called my friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills thinking about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. No one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors Lights I'd had. I have no known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out either. Nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened at that time. Only my mom ever believed me about this. Unfortunately, she is no longer alive, so I cannot ask her for more details than what I have been told growing up. My dad never wants to talk about what happened. I used to live in this rented house near an appliance store from birth, up until I was 6 years old. I'm 24 now. My dad worked nights, and me being the youngest sibling, I ended up sleeping in my parents' room until we moved out. It should be noted that one side of my bed was against a wall, and the other facing the doorway. I remember having this Cookie Monster plush that I was obsessed with, and would never go to sleep without it. If my mom ever tucked me in without it, I would throw a tantrum. Things started to change when I was about to turn 4. My mom would wake up and notice I'm sleeping without the plush, and she would find it under my bed. Not thinking much of it, she would just put it back in my bed and let me continue sleeping. This kept going on for a couple of weeks, until my mom finally decided to ask me why Cookie Monster would always be under my bed when she woke up. I remember saying something along the lines of, "He's my friend and he talks to me and likes to walk around at night." From my perspective, I knew I was talking to Cookie Monster because I could see his eyes. You know how he has those big white eyes that stick out? He would talk to me at night and help me go back to sleep when I was scared. My mom played it off as an overactive child's imagination, but it slowly got worse. Throughout the next couple of months, I would have night terrors. No, not simple nightmares. I am talking about full-blown night terrors. It was so bad that I would stiffen up and do nothing but scream as my mom tried to rock me back to sleep. This went on for almost every single night. They were so traumatic for my younger self that to this day, I can still remember what they were about. I would be laying in bed at night when my Cookie Monster plush would come to life, drag me out of my bed, and pull me under to eat me. I never stopped getting these dreams until I was 14. That is how scarring they were. About a year after moving out of the house, my mom learned the truth behind the whole ordeal. She woke up to some noises one night and heard me in the living room talking to Cookie Monster. Now, you might be expecting that I'm going to say she saw me talking to the plush, but you are wrong. You might expect me to say that I was lying in my bed and only the plush was out in the other room. But you are also wrong. The reality is much, much scarier. What my mom saw instead was so much worse than any paranormal activity you could ever see in any movie theater. For instead of a possessed doll, she saw me standing there, talking to the dark. My mom instinctively turned on the light, and as soon as she did, 2 old guys went running out of the now wide-open front door. The only thing I remember from that night was my mom holding on to me for dear life as my dad and the police rushed to the house. The thing that scares me to this day is not the fact that I was talking to 2 random strangers that night. I was talking to these people for months without knowing it. They were breaking into our house for months without kidnapping me or stealing anything from us. What scares me to this day is that I still have no idea what they ever plan to do. One of my best friends and I bonded pretty hard over our similar insomnia patterns. Knowing the other would probably be awake, we would usually text each other around 1 or 2 a.m. Having nothing else to do, we'd usually drive around town talking about random stuff, like movies we'd seen or stories related to songs on the radio. One night, our driving path led to this new subdivision just outside of city limits. It was off of a main highway, probably a mile or two east of town, where all the subdivisions had generic names and all the houses were different shades of the same brown or gray. As we pulled into this random subdivision, the first thing we noticed was the lack of streetlights. Usually these new subdivisions were lit out the ass, but this one wasn't, which was weird. Then we turned a corner and noticed at least 75% of the occupants of the houses on this block just randomly standing out in their front yards, with the lights out, at 2 a.m. We were like, what the f***? They weren't even doing anything, just standing there. We obviously immediately left. I've gone back to the place in broad daylight a couple of times, and it just looks like a normal neighborhood. This story never ceases to give me goosebumps. During my sophomore year of high school, my girlfriend and I were headed to the school dance. We lived in a small Texas town. For reference, my graduating class was 120. She picked me up. I was 15 at the time, so still not driving, and we got dinner. The meal went by faster than we expected, so we had about an hour to kill. We were driving on the back roads that were near her house, and she told me she had found the perfect makeout spot. So, of course, my hormonal brain didn't think about just how illegal or dangerous it was to trespass in the middle of nowhere. We pulled into a driveway, or what used to be one. The road was gravel for about 40 feet and then turned to dirt. The dirt road was extremely overgrown with grass and appeared to have not been used in years. There was a field to the left of us and a densely wooded area to the right. 3 large gravel piles were between us and the woods. When she pulled in, she pulled the car around to face the exit. Such a trivial thing, yet it made all the difference. She shut the car off and we hopped into the back seat, quickly getting down to business. About an hour goes by and we're about ready to hit the road. While we're getting dressed, she looks at me and says, "I really have to pee." At this point, my hormones are back under control, and I'm slowly realizing just how sketchy this place is. It's pitch black, the car is off, and all of our doors are unlocked. Right now, we're in the middle of nowhere. She was a stubborn girl, which might have had something to do with why we're not together anymore. I see her reaching for the door handle. I've had a few cinematic moments in my life, but the way that she reached for the door is something I'll never forget. Her hand moved so slowly as if she was waiting for something to happen. Just as her fingertips touched the handle, a crisp knocking noise comes from the back of the car. It was most certainly the sound of knuckles tapping against the top of the trunk. Keep in mind there are no trees or anything that could have been making this noise on the car. It was a perfect rhythm of knuckles on metal for about 10 seconds. Me and my girlfriend sat still, holding on to each other, neither of us even breathing. After the longest 10 seconds of my life, the knocking stops. It was dead silent. I attempted to look out the window to see if I could see anyone or anything, but I could hardly even see my girlfriend's face right in front of mine. "What the f*** was that?" she asked me. "I don't know. Just start the car." My hands were trembling and I could hear the fear in my own voice. "Babe, please start the car." The second she was quiet, the knocking started again, the same rhythmic beating that I can still remember perfectly. In the next 3 seconds, I was able to jump in the front seat, start the car, lock the doors, turn on the headlights, and put my seatbelt on, because safety first. I floored that Toyota Corolla like I was a fucking NASCAR driver. I hit about 50 on the turn out of that driveway, spewing gravel on whatever was behind me. I drove like a madman for about 2 miles down the road and stopped at an electric plant down the road. My girlfriend got out to use the bathroom and I sat in the front seat, my whole body still shaking. I got dressed, and we drove the rest of the way in silence. That was the first time I had driven a car outside of a parking lot. Once we got to the dance, we just sat in the corner. I have no idea what we even said to each other about it. I just knew that I was never going back to that place, or so I thought. Near the end of the dance, one of my best friends came up to me, and I explained to him what had happened. "We've got to go back." I couldn't believe my ears. This guy wants to go check it out. So the next day around noon, he picked me up and we went back to the spot. If he didn't believe me the night before, he definitely did now. I got a good look at the spot, just as I remembered it the night before. But now, I could really see how secluded it really was. There were no houses or buildings within sight of this place. I walked up to where the tire marks were from the night before, still fresh in the gravel. I grimaced as I noticed boot prints leading up to the back of the marks. 2 prints, side by side, right behind the back left tire. The prints came from and returned to the overgrown brush. My friend could tell I was pretty uncomfortable, so we decided to head out. A couple months went by, and me and my girlfriend broke up over unrelated matters. We attend different colleges now, but sometimes she will come and visit some high school friends who also attend my school. I saw her last semester. We caught up for a while, just talking about life. During a lull in the conversation, I asked her, "Do you ever think about that time?" She put her hand up, her smile gone from her face. "I don't think about it, ever." And that was the end of that. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel for more Reddit stories. See you in the next video.